Let me actually give a proper
Nope.
introduction to Kisa. So for those that might not know, actually Kisa and I met almost about a year ago, right around this time.
Mhm.
And that was actually a data science conference that I went to. And I remember Kisa was a panelist and I was a speaker at that conference. But what's striking about the way we met was that, I remember that day I had a huge giant breakfast. And then here I was, trying to get to the conference and then sitting down. And sometimes, at these conferences, when you have a lot of food in your body, that doesn't usually work too well. But there I was sitting in the panel where Kisa was speaking. And one of the things that really, really, surprised me was the very moment that she said that, hey, I'm a self-taught data scientist and I'm in healthcare. That was the moment I was like, wow, I stood up, I sat up and then I started paying attention. And of course, there she was giving her outlook, her insight on the trends of data science that year. So of course, since then we've kept in touch, professionally, and she's obviously been doing really well. She's a very accomplished data scientist. She's held senior positions in a lot of different companies, across many different verticals, industries. Right now, she's the VP of data science at Boodle AI. And very happy to have her here today to talk to us on the 5 common traps in data science. So without further ado, everybody please give a really warm welcome to Kisa.
Woo! Thank you. Thank
Welcome.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And everybody please mute yourself so we can, listen to her. And of course, at the end, we can open up to the floor for questions.
Well, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that conference was so fun, and I'm so glad I met you. So it was a great, very serendipitous, and I can't believe it's almost been a year. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Make this. Oh, where are you? There we go. And actually, I have a treat for you today. It's not the 5. I did say 5 originally, but actually I added a bonus one. So there's 6 traps of data science.
That's sweet. Thank you.
So I always like to make presentations fun. So you'll notice that my whole presentation has wacky titles and everything. It's just who I am as a person, and I think it's more interesting. So I'm really glad to be talking to you guys today. It's something I'm really passionate about. As Cho-Nan said, I am a self-taught data scientist. So I have fallen into every single one of the traps that I'm about to tell you about and worked my way out of it. But hopefully I can help you guys avoid them, or they probably will resonate with you because you've probably fallen into some of them already. So I have held various positions. I actually have no formalized education in data science. I actually have a bachelor's of mechanical engineering. So I tell everybody I spent $70,000 on my undergraduate degree, and I used a grand total of 1 class, which was Intro to Stats. So I came out of, so I paid 70 grand for a YouTube video, basically, because everything in that class I could have just learned on YouTube. But what it did teach me, and I will say this, studying engineering, mechanical engineering, it taught me practicality. It gave me a focus on problem solving, how to approach problems. That has served me very, very well in my career. I'm a very practical person. I don't do anything that's not going to be useful. So right out of there, I was kind of thrust into the world of data science at Rolls-Royce. I was a data engineer, data scientist hybrid. Actually, I did the full stack. I did everything from develop databases and database design, to the pipelines, to doing data science, to doing front-end web application development. It was very trial by fire. You know, it was at that company that I taught myself Python and R and SQL, and I didn't know any of those before I started that. Statistics. It was a crazy 2 years. But from there, that really kind of launched me into this senior data scientist, head of analytics career that I've had. And I worked for a media agency for a couple of years, and then I transitioned to a healthcare startup called Patient Pop. And due to COVID, I left that position and became the vice president of data at Boodle AI, which is where I am right now, and I'm loving it. And on top of all of that, professionally, I'm a wife, I'm a mom of 3. I have a 7, a 4, and a 5-month-old baby girl. And I problem solve in every aspect of my life. So I tend to call myself a professional problem solver. So we're just going to jump right into the traps. So if you go back here, there's 6 traps. They all have fun names to hopefully help you remember them. So the first one is keep it simple, silly. It's supposed to be stupid, but I felt like that was mean, so I decided to change it. So keep it simple, silly. One of the most common trap that I see data scientists fall into is overcomplicating it. Keep it simple. You know, there are so many fantastic algorithms out there that you can use, so many fantastic models out there that you can build. But the fact of the matter is that when you overcomplicate something, when you use a complex model, there is a trade-off, and that trade-off typically comes at a higher infrastructure cost. It's a high communication cost, meaning it's much easier to explain logistic regression than it is a neural net, specifically to non-technical stakeholders. Everything that you do has to go through a business stakeholder, and if you can't explain it to them, it won't get used. It's not useful. It has no impact. And so, complex models are great, but they're really hard to explain. They're really hard to get confidence and trust behind, which we'll talk about later, which leads to typically a very low adoption rate. And in my experience, oftentimes the most effective solutions don't even involve a model at all. They involve just pure and simple data analytics. So in conclusion, don't do 2 times 5 plus 4 minus 10 to get to 4. Just do 2 plus 2. Like, we don't need to overcomplicate this. My second trap, context, is everything. It is so important to understand the ask before you build a solution. Collecting proper business requirements from every stakeholder will save you a ton of heartache in the end. Oftentimes you actually have to help them oftentimes they won't actually come to you with proper business requirements either. And so you're going to have to work with them to collect really concise, specific, SMART goals, if you've ever heard that acronym, SMART goals, because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what you can provide until you tell them what they can ask for. And so really working with every stakeholder, not just the person who brought it to you, but you have to really spend some time at the beginning of a project identifying who is every single person, every single department that could use this. A perfect example is at my last company, Patient Pop, I built a churn model. I built a model that predicted the likelihood a customer was going to request to cancel in the next 3 months. And that the primary stakeholder for that, so the person who basically decided whether or not this project succeeded or was a failure, was the VP of customer success. So she was the one that brought us the original ask, the original requirements. However, that churn model also could be used for retention. that churn model could also be used for identifying ideal customers for sales and marketing. And so you have to spend some time at the very beginning of that at your projects, really identifying who it is that could use any type of derivative from that project, because you want to bring them into the conversation early on. Because if you can, you know, kill two birds with one stone, that's great. So conclusion, before you begin, collect requirements from your primary stakeholders, which is the person who basically decides whether you win or lose, your end users, and that means the people that are on the ground doing the things that are going to be using your output directly. So for my instance, in the churn example, this is like a customer success manager, the people who are actually going to be using the predictions that or model or segments that you create and or analyses that you use. And then any secondary stakeholders, trying to get them in on the conversation as early as possible will help you expand and really increase the impact that your models have. Number 3, be aware of your surroundings. We do not live in a closed system. A closed system is a concept that I learned in mechanical engineering when they're talking about conservation of energy. Closed system is something that nothing from the outside affects the inside. We do not live in a closed system. Models cannot be created in a vacuum. Our world is ever increasingly interconnected. Trying to build a predictive model or a segmentation model or anything that has to do with has a historical state associated with it without understanding the external factors that affect that model is an exercise in futility. Again, another example, I'm gonna bring it back to my good old churn model that I use. I'll use the churn model a lot because I fell into a lot of these traps. I built a churn model and it performed reasonably well, but there was still, it was still very limited. Like there were things that it wasn't capturing and everything, and that was because the healthcare market is very, very susceptible to what is happening in the world. So we're talking about like economic factors, things like your stock market, location specific factors. You know, how many of a similar type of doctor were they in a really competitive market? Did they have, you know, was there 10 plastic surgeons within walking distance from their office? You know, product specific state. Were they using the newest version of our product, or were they using the product 2 years ago that didn't have X, Y, and Z features? These were all things that I didn't put into my initial model, and it really showed in the output and the predictive power that I had. Once I did put them in, you know, and this is actually really a good place where you can engage your business stakeholders, because your business stakeholders have that domain knowledge that can really help you fill in those gaps. They can think about things like, oh yeah, we changed the product, you know, 6 months ago and added this new feature, and before then they didn't have that feature. Or just brainstorming with people of like, oh yeah, you remember that was an election year, and so you know, election years are really volatile in sales and stuff. So conclusion, I crossed out stop and smell the roses, but stop and add the roses. Companies don't live in a vacuum, and neither should your models. You know, and I give you a few common factors that you can consider adding. A really good one for location is things like population density, understanding whether or not, if you have any type of location specific data, understanding whether it comes from a rural region or, you know, an urban region, or are they on the East Coast or the West Coast? These are all really useful. The stock market, it has a ton of historical data that you can use to really as a proxy for like the economic state that the world was in at that point in time. So just a couple of things that you could add to really improve your models. Stick to what you don't know. Do not follow. I have seen this happen over and over. This is actually not a trap that I have fallen into, because as someone who is self-taught, I learned early on the lesson of always learning and trying to expose myself to new ideas and new algorithms and new models and new techniques and things like that. Don't fall into the trap of using the same model for every problem. I know many, many really brilliant people who they will only ever use a random forest model. It doesn't matter if they're trying to do a regression. It doesn't matter if they're trying to do a classification. It doesn't matter the context. They just love random forests. And they will, actually another common one is neural nets. They'll use a neural net for everything. It does not matter what you are trying to solve for, the neural net is the way to go. And you can, like, don't get me wrong, there are the algorithms that are out today that are readily available that you can develop with. You can use them in a lot of different contexts, in a lot of different situations. And there is something to be said with familiarity. You know, I personally am very familiar with XGBoost. I use it a lot. But I always, at the beginning of every project, think about what is the data telling me? What is the solution? You know, what are new techniques out there? I like XGBoost, but there are a ton of really great other gradient boosted algorithms that are and packages that are being developed every day. There's AdaBoost, there's CatBoost, there's there's a couple of other ones I can't remember off the top of my head, but they all have different benefits, and they all have different weaknesses, and really understanding what those are and how they match the problem set that you're trying to solve is really important. I have pop-ups from, not pop-ups, I get emails every day from like Towards Data Science and Medium, and they send me, you know, someone's always writing a new article about a new algorithm that's out there. And I also use Kaggle. Kaggle is a great site because it's a competition site. There's a lot of really great, people share a lot of really great new techniques, cutting edge techniques there. And so I like to, you know, snoop on the competitions and be like, oh, okay, look, this is what they're using, and really use that as inspiration for what I'm doing at that time as well. So conclusion, you don't know what you don't know. So keep learning, keep challenging your assumptions, keep growing. It's only going to make you better. Never leave a man behind. This may come as a surprise. I hope it doesn't, but it may come as a surprise, but not everybody trusts data. They don't understand, so they don't use it. Data science is nothing if not a confidence game. You can have the greatest model in the entire world, but if someone has zero confidence or zero trust in what you are producing, it's not going to be used. It's not going to be useful. It's not going to be impactful, and you are not, honestly, you are not doing your job at that point in time. You have got to work with people where they are instead of forcing them where you want to be. Because if you force them into a situation where they're not comfortable, if you force them and nag them into agreeing to something, they're never going to, you want to create advocates, not adversaries. And if you're forcing people into uncomfortable situation, you're creating adversaries rather than advocates. Now, the best way to do this is find out where feel out at the beginning of a project, feel out where everybody is, and then bring them along with you as you develop through collaboration, through communication. Most times, the newer someone is to data, the less they trust data, the more you need to communicate and include them. And basically what you're doing at that point in time, by asking for their feedback, by, you know, picking their domain knowledge, by, you know, having a lot of touch points with them, you can turn someone who is uncomfortable with data into an advocate for your product. And by engaging them at the very, very beginning of by as early as possible. Sometimes people jump into the middle of projects, that's fine. But, you know, just engage them as early as possible and really treat them with, don't be patronizing, basically. Don't assume that you always know what's right. Don't assume that they don't, you know, they don't understand what you're talking about. But, you know, really try to get them along. I always talk about the data journey. Figure out where they're at on their data journey and bring them along with you. 50% of your job will be educating others. So learning how to speak their language is very important. Which also goes to, don't use technical jargon that other people aren't going to understand just to make yourself feel smart, which is also another, which isn't a trap I go over, but that's another freebie I'll throw out there. I think this is my last one. This is my last one. So don't forget to aim. So here's a riddle. If a data scientist builds a model and no one uses it, does the model actually exist? And the answer is no one cares. The name of the game is AIM. So adoption, impact, money. You can build the greatest model in the world, but if no one uses it, if it has no impact and you can't tie it to the money, it's useless. This is so important. A lot of times what I see data scientists or data analysts, data teams in general, what they do is they kind of view their work in a silo, and they think about, okay, here's the problem set. I've collected these great product requirements. I'm going to build this model, but they have no idea how that model is actually going to be implemented, how it's actually going to, they have no thought process or concept of how do we productionize this? How is this going to be used? What's the touch like? You know, I can build a great model. It has a super high precision, super high recall, great AUC, it's beautiful. But the fact of the matter is, if it's not in an output, or if it's not integrated into the system that they need, the way that they use, if I can't deliver it to them in a timely manner, if we don't have the infrastructure to support it, it's useless. I have wasted time and money, and that, honestly, I view that as a failure of my job. And so you have to, at the beginning of a project, you have to set a clear plan for adoption. That also goes along with, you have to figure out how you're going to measure success with your models. What is the impact? What is the metric that you're going to measure whether or not your project, your model is succeeding? This does two things. One, it makes it very easy to, it makes it very easy to say, yes, we won, we lost. But then two, it also helps you iterate. And so if you see that, if you have an idea on what metrics that you're going to use for impact, you can watch them. And if those impact metrics start to slip or anything, that can be a flag for you to go back and be like, okay, now it's time to iterate and revamp this model. And then tying it to the money. I mean, honestly, you work in a nonprofit, you work in a commercial setting. Everybody has a bottom line that they are focused on. And most of the time that bottom line is tied to money. It's tied to revenue. It's tied to donations. And so tying your model to either a revenue increase or a cost savings is very important, because there's always going to come a point where you're going to have to defend your value as a team, as a individual. There will come a time where you have to defend your value of, like, oh, you know, because data science is not a cheap endeavor. Data science and analytics typically are fairly expensive. And so there has to be a return on investment. There has to be an ROI, and figuring out how to tie each and every project that you do to an ROI is very important. That also goes back to, you have to get stakeholder agreement on this at the beginning of the project. So identifying your adoption plan, your impact plan, and how to tie it to money, and then getting your stakeholders to say, yes, that is how we are going to define success with this project, is something that you need to do, again, early on in the project. Don't wait until after you've finished your model, because then you're going to waste time going back and having to redo things because it doesn't fit into the adoption or the infrastructure. And that's it. That's my 6, or 5 plus a bonus, common traps, and hopefully how to avoid them. So questions.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kisa. These are such valuable lessons that I'm sure has already inspired a ton of questions in the audience. I'm going to be a little bit selfish, going to ask the first one so that everybody gets some time to formulate their questions. My first question is, it's related to your topic. What would be, you know, one of the common traps for recruiting, you know, for your data team? I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, a common trap that I see, and I full disclosure, I'm a little biased. Gonna throw that out there right now, and I know I'm biased. So, but a common trap I see people, management fall into when they're recruiting for their teams is focusing solely on technical skills. Well, it's kind of two. Focusing solely on technical skills, but then also focusing on like academics. I'm a big proponent of education. I will never knock education. Education is very important, but education comes in a variety of forms. You need people who have formalized education on your team. You know, I've hired PhDs. I've hired people who don't even have a bachelor's degree before. Everybody comes with specialized knowledge in some area, and they've learned it in different ways, and it's very important to make sure that you have a diversity of ways that they've learned. Hire your PhDs, but then also don't just make it a requirement that you have to have a PhD to work on your team, because there are some rock stars. We had a rock star data analyst at my last company who he transitioned from customer success, and because he transitioned from customer success, he obviously didn't have any formalized training in data science. He was completely self-taught like me, but he brought with him a ton of business domain knowledge, which is super important and leads me to the second part. Make sure that you're hiring for soft skills. Technical skills are great, but technical skills can also be learned on the job. I am proof of that. You can learn technical skills on the job, but soft skills, it sounds cliche, soft skills, how you communicate to people who are thoughtful in the way that they collaborate with others and have a vision for practicality, not just theory, are really, really important concepts to really look out for when you're hiring.
This is great. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. I'm gonna open the floor. Anybody who would like to ask Kisa a question, please go ahead, unmute yourself.
So how do you pronounce your name? I want to make sure that I do that properly, because you deserve nothing but, like, I have so much respect for you, lady.
It's Kisa. It's like Lisa with a K.
Okay, Kisa. Okay. Anyway, I just have a comment, and I want to say this is probably one of my most favorite technical, workshops, webinar. I mean, I could just tell you're just so, like, down to earth, and you're like, you have so much wisdom in just a short amount of time that you presented. But I think all of us took a bunch of notes from it. And I just want to say thank you so much for spending this time with us. I learned a lot. I wrote a bunch of notes. I'm in member success team. And funny enough, we're working on a churn model. So this is so, like, so I was just like, oh my God, this is great. So I just wanted to thank you. That's really what I got to say. This is a very, very good presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I mean, it's really important. So you're on the member services team?
Yeah, I'm on the member services team, correct.
So would you be the business stakeholder, or would you be the developer? Like,
I'm a business stakeholder, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not the developer.
So you play I will say this, you play a super important part in every single data project that comes your way, because there is always, I mean, it doesn't matter if you have a great adoption plan. I harp on it a lot, but there's always going to be roadblocks. And so having advocates, people who are excited to learn more about data science, who are enthusiastic about it, who bring this really awesome firsthand domain knowledge, is so important. So you play a huge, very important role in every single data project that you get to be a part of.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure that the developers are on this line right now. So, and they're here with us today. So I'm very happy. Thank you so much.
Perfecto. Oye, mira, te mandé el DS3.
Thank you, Yvette, for your comment.
I
I have a question, Kisa, and
donde dice datos del trabajador.
can somebody
va el nombre
mute
de,
Jerry, please?
o sea, de todos los.
Yep,
You got
go
it.
ahead.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Kisa, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm the co-founder of Camino Financial and the chief operating officer, and I'm personally definitely getting much smarter on data and the different components of it and how it functions in an organization. My question is kind of the flip side of your presentation, which is, what are some of the most common mistakes business stakeholders, managers make when it comes to data science?
Ooh, this is a great question, and I could give an entire presentation on this one as well. Just real quick, I would say, one, you have to be okay with failure. Data science is not a perfect. It's not a perfect science. Honestly, data science is kind of a misnomer. There is a huge component of art to it. There's the art of data science. And so you really have to be, as a business stakeholder, have to be committed to the process. And the process is going to involve failure. And failure is never final unless you give up. And, the business stakeholders basically get to decide when the company gives up because they lose confidence. And so I would say that that's a big thing, is you have to be okay if there's not everything's going to be a home run. That being said, you are a huge component of the success of data projects. Data science does not live in a vacuum. Data projects do not live in a vacuum, and they require so much domain knowledge to be inserted into them. I think things like, some people get lulled into this idea of the fact that you can just take this kind of data, shove it into an algorithm and get an output. But the fact of the matter is there's so much curation of the data that you have to put in there. And that curation really comes from collaboration with business stakeholders. So really identifying the models are only going to be as good as the input that we give it to it. And that input is only going to be as good as the input that we get from our business stakeholders. And then probably the last thing I will say is adoption. The adoption plan, I cannot stress enough of how many times I have seen data teams and data projects fail because they do not think about adoption. And the business stakeholder is a huge component of adoption. So the more you can get involved with thinking about, how are we going to implement this? How are we going to track whether or not this has success? What do I really care about? The more that you can think about that and really get into the nitty-gritty of it, and be involved in that aspect and really become an advocate for it, is huge. I can't stress this because that has probably been, I've seen entire teams implode because none of their products are getting adopted. And the whole company just kind of implodes around that data team. And so I think adoption is just something that everybody has to be involved with.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer.
So along those lines, and by the way, your presentation was so good because I think from your experience, these are just very real problems that occur, and it's just very, I think, very pragmatic yet philosophical at the same time. So appreciate the talk. I kind of make a similar thread of a kind of a framing of the question as Kenya put it. It seems to me that, in similar examples of this, the data science comes almost as this apologist kind of role, right? That, well, you know, kind of get buy-in, get advocacy, and kind of, Kenny point out, you know, why is that? Given that, you know, this is now becoming a standard requirement for success for most companies nowadays. Curious on is it just a current thing? Is it evolving? Yeah.
It's getting better. I will say that it is getting better. This is a little soapbox. So I deal a lot with non-technical people. Not so much in my current role. My current role, I'm actually really lucky that most of my team has at least some technical background. But my previous companies, I've worked with a lot of non-technical people. I've worked with a lot of people who have been doing the same job day in, day out for 30 years. And they do it one way and they want to do it that way. One company, and I'll share this, at Canella Media, I walked in and they were still literally printing out all of their media schedules on physical pieces of paper every single day. Each media buyer would print out at least 50 pieces of paper, and that's how they would highlight the spots that they would want manually. And that's how they were like doing media buys and stuff like that. And this was every single day. They were still printing out all of their contracts. And I think it just comes to you don't know what you don't know, and you don't trust what you don't know. And that's why one of my slides was all about meeting people where they're at on the data journey, because you're only as strong as your weakest link. You're only going to progress as far as the person who trusts data the least will let you go, if that makes sense. And so you have to bring people along there. And there is this hesitation because they just don't trust the data. They don't trust the data. And the recent headlines about data privacy issues and all of this stuff going out there doesn't really help the situation at all, because they're like, oh, Big Brother's watching me, you know, and there are some ethical concerns there as well. But there's just this hesitation of like, I've always done it this way. Why do I have to change it any differently? Now, as there's this younger generation that's coming on right now and really coming into this professional world. They grew up around computers. They grew up with a cell phone in their hand. They're used to data. And so there's a lot more adoption there, easier adoption to get people to go. But it also ultimately just comes down to confidence. And reputation is everything. And that's another thing that business stakeholders can keep in mind is like, because I have seen so many new data teams fail because they lose the confidence after one misfire. And reputation is everything. And so what you can do as a data team is making sure that what you're putting out is solid, that you've checked your I's, you've dotted your I's, crossed your T's, you've thought about the impact, you've looked at it from 16 different angles, you've engaged people along the way. Making sure that what you're putting out is solid is so important, because really it can take one misstep and the entire company loses confidence in what you've done. And then it becomes just that much harder for people to adopt later on.
Definitely appreciate it, resonate with it. I think one thing I really love is that it's a company that really believes in this stuff. Obviously, having you here is a statement to that kind of point of view. But I've experienced that side where, you know, unless there's buy-in at the top, it's kind of swimming upstream, right? And now you have to kind of be very, unfortunately, political in your navigation to get adoption. So definitely appreciate your points here. Thank you.
Great. Anybody has more questions? Kisa?
I had one to go
Yeah,
sort
please.
of to the nerdier side of it. This is Drew, by the way. I'm called in from my phone here. But your first point was to keep it simple, get to 4 by doing 2 + 2 instead of, you know, some overly complicated approach. How do you balance that against, like, maybe the more complicated approach is theoretically more accurate and might be more applicable as time goes down, versus having that like easily explainable to the business unit approach. How do you balance that dynamic, I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's a good
Simplicity
question.
versus theoretical accuracy.
Yes, and that's a great question. I actually get asked this, or I used to get asked this a lot at my last company. When is good enough good enough? And it's a fine line to figure out. There's a cost benefit to everything. You can use a more complicated model, but you just have to understand the cost benefit of it and really keep that in mind. Sometimes a neural net really is the best way to go about it. But if it is the best way to go about it, you need to be darn sure that you've thought about, how are we going to implement this? How are we going to productionalize this? What is the backup costs of this? My big point is, don't build models in a silo, and don't think about where the data is coming from or how you're going to get where you need to go. Building things if you have the infrastructure to support a neural net and it's not going to be that much of a lift or a load increase, then yeah, it's absolutely something you can share. But neural nets also take a lot more time to develop than running something as simple as a logistic regression. So really, it comes from understanding what the business requirements are. Can you answer their question with a reasonable confidence with something simpler? Always choose the simpler option as far as choose the simplest option you can. Now, if you can't get a good model without using a neural net, then by all means use a neural net. But if you can get a reasonably, and reasonably is again one of those subjective terms that you have to talk it over with your stakeholders, who your primary stakeholders are. If you can get to it with a simpler model, use the simpler model. I think so often there's so many cool things out there. Don't get me wrong. There's so many cool algorithms and ways to increase your accuracy. And there's just so much cool stuff out there. And I think my big point is, don't do cool stuff, just do cool stuff. Like, always keep in mind the practicality of it and how it's going to be used and what's going to be most effective for your end user. Because you're not building models for yourself, you're building models for other people. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Yeah. In your opinion, what are some of the best ways to develop trust and confidence from non-technical stakeholders that a model or project will actually generate the ROI you believe it will generate?
Great question. Engage them early. 100%. It's the easiest way to gain the trust and confidence, is to engage them early on. If you try to develop a model and then deliver it, and you haven't engaged them through the process of building the model, it becomes, it is like a brick wall that you have to scale at that point in time. So engaging them early is so important. Also, going for I am not against going for some quick wins, some low-hanging fruit, some really easy. One of the things that I do whenever I start a new position or work with a new company or new department or anything, is I go to them and I ask them, what are your pain points and how can I help? And I've done things that don't even involve data science or analytics for them. Like, for instance, I built a VBA based spreadsheet that just automated some of the workflow out of their life. And it took me, 3 hours, 4 hours, but it saved them. It's something that they used all day, every day, and it saved them like days of work. And because of that, they they then associated with me. They then associated me and what I was doing with the idea. They knew I was on their team. They knew I was trying to make their lives easier, and they knew that I was there to help them, and I wanted to solve problems. And so if you can solve a super simple problem that maybe will take you a couple hours work, but it'll save them so much time, go after those a couple of those low-hanging fruit before you try to go after, something bigger. It'll make it so much easier.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great question. Anyone else would like to ask Kisa more questions? Oh, okay. So it looks like that's all the questions we have at this time. I don't want to hold you back, Kisa. So with that said, I would like to thank you, for coming on to our Brown Bag Tech Talk series and giving a talk on the 5 common traps of data science. And, I'm sure everybody on the team has taken down like notes, and actually, honestly, at the personal level, almost everything you said resonated with me 100%. So I'm very, very delighted that you were able to make some time for us today. And,
thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And I hope to see you soon,
Yeah, I hope either virtually or when we can go back to conferences again.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for having me. And, anybody has any additional questions or wants any more feedback, I included my email here. So thank you.
Yeah, let's give him another round of applause. Thanks, Kisa.
Bye.
Woo! Excelente.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Kisa.
Bye.
Bye.